This as the head of diplomacy at the International Relations Department, Clayson Monyela, says the government has noted the letter from U.S. congressmen to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken regarding the AGOA Forum being moved from South Africa. Monyela says no decision has been made by Washington as yet. We're now joined by author Victor Kgomoeswana from the University of Limpopo to take a look at this. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Of what benefit is our relationship with AGOA to the Americans? What do they stand to lose should things go south?
Good morning, Tutu. It's obvious that trade with a great country and economy like the United States is not something to sniff at. The volume, about what, 20 billion or so, let's say 7 billion either way in terms of exports and imports. South Africa exports, I think, automotive products. It exports some raw minerals or commodities, and I think it exports some textiles here and there, but it's not on the large scale. And of course, the essence of AGOA is not just South Africa. So in this case, I'm looking at South Africa because that's where the lawmakers are focusing. But we stand to lose that kind of trade, that volume of trade. But let's put it in context, because in the end, we have to do everything in context. That 7 billion of imports and exports pales in significance when you look at how much South Africa is doing in China, with business with China and with the other BRICS countries. China alone, I think South Africa exports over $20 billion annually, and China exports more or less the same amount. But if you look at the entire African continent, then China's trade with Africa has way overshot $200 billion, and it has grown exponentially. So if you look at it in context, you will understand why. And the reason I'm bringing the context in, is not just for fun, is because the reason America is putting this pressure it is putting on South Africa and the continent is because they are worried about losing their power economically and otherwise to China.
There is the China element, and then there's the element of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And so what does this essentially mean? I guess maybe asking in terms of bolstering or fast-tracking that.
Yeah, I wish America could understand that it's an important trading partner to South Africa and to the African continent. America has influenced the continent and the world in a big way. It is a superpower. It was a superpower. What it means, though, I would say it's for America to realize that it can do trade with anybody in the world, as it does, of course, but it must not make the terms of doing trade only to suit American interests. At the moment, the conditions that they are talking about for AGOA to not be moved from South Africa are suited to the American interests. It's almost like, if I said to you, if I ever see you talking to my enemy, I will consider you an enemy. And that is what I don't think is fair, and I don't think America should be allowed to do, because it is essentially saying, oh, we suspect you are doing business with Russia. You are non-aligned, you are neutral, you are not voting against Russia, and therefore you are the enemy because Russia we consider an enemy. And I'm saying it's not even about Russia. This is about BRICS. It's about China, which is threatening the position of the U.S. So what it means is for America to realize that the power has shifted from the west to the east, and it is a superpower still, but it's going to be overtaken by China, and maybe start learning to operate in a multilateral dispensation. At the moment, the U.S. still wants to operate like the Cold War era, where you were either against the U.S. or you were with the USSR. Those days are gone, and I think America should learn to do that. I believe South Africa and Africa should assert themselves, because they can't be pushed around to make enemies just because of what America considers an enemy.
And I'd like for us to expand on that point. What do the days ahead look like, especially in a continent where it would appear from the outside looking in that we are fragmented? Intercontinental trade is not nearly where it is supposed to be. The movement of people, we're still having debates about that, the instability that is still going on in the continent. In whose interest is it that we, in 2023, remain in a position where you are wrapped over the knuckles for having an independent voice and thought?
Yeah, the future, in fact, although I agree with you that intra-Africa trade is not at the level it should be, but let's admit, over the past 2-3 years, lots of strides have been made to the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat in Ghana has made a lot of strides in creating platforms, in creating dispensations for that to happen. Already, I'm sure you saw, Namibia, Botswana are already able to use each other's national identity document as a passport effectively. And you have the one passport in East Africa, you have the West African community, the economic community of West African states with their currency. They are very close to coming to an agreement there. And if you look at SADC, the central banks have done a lot of good work to make sure that they can work together to allow the money transfers among the different countries or between the different countries. And last but not least, there are many border posts, including the Beitbridge border post, where there's a lot of upgrade of movement, of infrastructure to make sure that the movement of goods and people or persons can be facilitated. So although it doesn't look like it on the surface, because we are coming from a very low base, under 20% of exports in Africa are going to other African countries. But if you look at what's been happening since 2020, it's a lot of progress. And that's why I'm insisting that South Africa and Africa should not be pushed around. No other country should allow this AGOA Forum to be moved to it, because they should say, we are now a free trade area. So if you bully one of us, you're effectively bullying all of us. And I'm telling you this, nobody's going to do that for Africa. Africa is going to have to do it for itself. It's going to have to assert itself and say to America, we love to do business with you. We value our trade relations. We respect you as a country. All we are asking is that you respect our independence and our sovereignty.
Yeah. How do you also understand that? Because this has also fragmented discourse in this country. For instance, you've got some political parties who will then fly off in the name of saving AGOA, where you're just so confused, like, who is running this country, right? Because also, what does that do optics-wise, number one? And maybe number two, you speak of African leaders asserting themselves. What do you tell the population of this continent, some of whom are saying, well, we have to be economic migrants to these very nations that, are pushing people back when they make their own decisions?
I heard Premier Winde of the Western Cape talking about his trip, and he said, no, this trip was planned way ahead of time, although we were aware that there are already rumblings. I think I had that interview with one of the media houses. You know what? Obviously, politicians, I don't trust politicians, I don't trust businessmen, because they do what suits their interests at that particular time, even if it means dividing everybody else. What I will tell the continent of Africa is what I've always told the people of Africa and the world over the past 21 years. Africa, you are worthy. Africa, you deserve self-respect. And starting with yourself, make sure that you teach the world how you want to be treated. People will only respect Africa in as much as Africa seems to respect itself. But I agree with you, the optics of having one province of the country going to schmooze and try and sweet talk America is not working in the interest of national unity. But I suppose politicians will remain politicians. Maybe they are thinking about Cape Town, of course, as a destination. It's a very popular destination in Africa. It's the number one popular destination when it comes to meetings, conferences, and events. It's followed by Nairobi, I think, or Kigali, I'm not sure, but one East African. So I'm sure they are protecting their own interests, but I'm sure somebody has to advise them that they are still part of South Africa. But as to what politicians will do, you and I can never know. They are their own masters when it comes to behavior, especially when it comes to matters of gaining political currency.
Yeah, but that's the thing, because the dynamics are moving and they're changing so much, because Rwanda is actually the destination of choice for conferences and events. And so this not working together and working in silos, in wrapping up the conversation, one, what will it cost us? And just maybe reflecting on the events of the past few days, the contingency, the media contingency that is meant to give us the other side of the story between both Russia and Ukraine, today confirming that they won't be allowed into Russia, as well as the President's protection services not being allowed into Russia as well today. What have you read into those events?
Well, that's why I'm one of the people who are for the African leaders going to Russia and Ukraine, because one, Africans have always negotiated their way out of conflict. South Africa is an example, Sudan is another example, the DRC is another, Nigeria. You know, there are so many countries. What is it? Cote d'Ivoire. There's always been conflict in Africa, and African leaders have always been able to negotiate and find their way. It might not look like it, but we are the masters of negotiated settlements. So I'm reading into this that Russia is asserting itself. It's saying, look, we have a position. Ukraine is asserting itself. Let's not forget, that is a NATO complication, and NATO has the U.S. right in the middle of it. So it is, you can say, America's doing that we have the conflict we have, because NATO keeps aggressively going into territories that it shouldn't go into. But that's another topic for another forum. I'm not qualified to comment on that. But what I'm reading into this is that that's exactly why we need African leaders to negotiate or mediate with Russians and the Ukrainians, because Russia, China, and all the BRICS nations on the one side, US and Europe on the other side, all these two sides are looking for is the economic potential of the African continent. They want to milk it. So if Africans do not have a united front in talking to Russia, and I commend President Ramaphosa for at least trying to unite African leaders around this negotiated settlement. I'm not saying they will get the Russians to do what they want, but at least they are showing that as Africans, we are a united force. We want peace in Ukraine because we value the trade we are doing with Russia and other BRICS nations. At the same time, the same unity then must be taken to the Americans to say, we respect you as a country, but we ask you to respect us as well. So I'm very curious to see what will happen, but I'm still proud that African leaders are not sitting on the fence and they are not taking sides in this conflict that Africa has no business getting involved in. But they are saying negotiation has delivered freedom and independence to South Africa. We are sure it can deliver peace to Ukraine and Russia.
Victor Kgomoeswana, thank you very much, sir, for your time this morning.